Every night you die. You don't feel it that way. You haven't been told using that word. But that is exactly what happens. For hours, the being you call I dissolves into somewhere no one has yet been able to map with certainty, and morning after morning you wake up convinced that you are the same person who went to bed. But how do you know? What proof do you have that the consciousness reading these words inside you right now is the same one that existed last night at 11 o'clock? You have none. You have memories, you have sensations, you have the same face in the mirror, but the mirror only reflects the surface. And what happens beneath the surface during sleep is something science has only brushed against, something the oldest traditions tried to codify, and something you, every single night, without exception, experience without understanding absolutely anything of what is happening to you. I want you to pause for a moment before continuing. Think about the exact instant you fall asleep, not the moment you close your eyes, but that razor edge of a second when consciousness gives way. Do you remember it? Of course not. Nobody remembers it, because in that instant, there is no one there to remember. The observer disappears before they can register their own disappearance. What lies just before deep sleep is a threshold, and on the other side of that threshold, you are not there, or you are there in a way so completely different that the self you have built for yourself throughout your entire life cannot sustain itself there for even a second. That should disturb you more than it does. We live in an era that has normalized unconsciousness. We have grown accustomed to the idea that sleeping is just a biological process, a sort of system shutdown so that organs can repair themselves, memories can consolidate, and the brain can rest. And there is truth in that, yes, but that explanation has the same value as describing the ocean by saying it is salt water. Technically correct, radically insufficient. Because what happens to your consciousness during sleep is not just maintenance. It is something that, if you were to look at it head-on and without conceptual anesthesia, would completely change the way you understand what you are. There is a first layer that almost everyone knows about and almost no one has truly thought about. Dreams. Those images, those scenes, those voices that appear when the daytime self loosens its grip. Most people treat them as noise, as residues of the day, as neuronal garbage that the brain flushes out while it reboots. And there are those who go a step further and say they are messages from the unconscious, that they must be interpreted, that the symbol of the snake means this and the symbol of the house means that. But even that reading falls short because it is trapped in the same snare. It keeps treating dreams as something that happens to the self, when the more disturbing question is, what are you when you dream? When you dream, you build entire worlds. Buildings you have never visited, people you have never met, conversations you have never had. And in that world, you are not just the protagonist. You are also the stage. You are the city. You are the rain. You are the voice of the stranger who tells you something that makes your blood run cold. Everything that appears in the dream comes out of you. Every dark figure, every locked room, every faceless pursuer, every impossible love, all of that is you. What kind of thing are you, then, that can generate entire realities while the body lies motionless? Now I want to take you deeper, beyond dreams, because dreams are only the second layer of what happens during the night. There is something deeper, a state that most people don't even know exists, because nothing is remembered within it. Dreamless sleep, deep sleep, total darkness. Scientifically, it is the state where the body repairs itself with the greatest efficiency, where blood pressure drops, where brain waves become slow and almost seismic. But that doesn't answer the question. The question is, where are you when you are in that state? There are no images, there is no internal narrator, there is no sense of time, There is no self. And yet, something persists. Something has to persist, because upon waking, you are not a stranger to yourself. There is a continuity that cuts through that darkness, an invisible thread connecting the self of yesterday with the self of today. And that thread passes through a territory where ordinary consciousness does not exist. What is that thread? What part of you survives in the absolute night? There are traditions that have spent millennia asking that very same question with a seriousness that modern neuroscience laboratories are only just beginning to match. I am not going to cite them by their academic names. I am not going to give you a list of cultures and dates. What I am going to do is tell you what they found, because they found it not in books, but in the direct experience of people who decided not to fall asleep without looking first. Imagine a man sitting in a room without light, longer ago than you can calculate. He has learned to observe the moment he falls asleep, to stay on the edge, awake and asleep at the same time. What he describes is not a dream. It is an expansion. He says that in that instant, just before falling, there is a flash, as if consciousness, upon letting go of the body, became for a second vaster, more silent, more real than during the day. And then, darkness. And in the darkness, according to him, there is no absence. There is a presence without form, without a name, without a self, a consciousness that does not think, but is, a witness that needs no object. What that man without a name or a date describes, that is what dreams try to communicate to you every night with their images and their symbols. That there is something in you that is not the self you believe yourself to be. That when you sleep, that self retreats like the tide, and what is left on the shore when the water recedes is not nothingness. It is something that can never be fully named, but that you have felt, yes, you have felt it. In those rare seconds when you wake up before the self has time to rebuild itself, in those moments of the early morning when you don't know who you are and you don't care, in those moments when the silence inside is deeper than any word. And here we arrive at the point that causes the most discomfort. Because if every night you die in a certain sense, and every morning you are reborn, and that process happens with or without your consent, without your understanding, without your conscious participation, then the obvious question is this: what would happen if you did participate? What would happen if instead of falling asleep the way a stone falls, you learn to enter that threshold with the eyes of consciousness wide open? There are those who have done it. There are those who do it. These are not fantasies. They are not pretty metaphors for a YouTube video. They are documented, mapped practices, passed down with the same seriousness with which any technical knowledge is transmitted. And what those who master them report is not nighttime entertainment. It is a complete reorientation of what they understand by reality. Because when you learn to move consciously within the territory of sleep, you discover something that changes everything else, that the rules governing that space are different from the ones governing this one. But they are no less real. They are simply different. And if the rules can be different there, how can you be so sure that the ones here are absolute? Now stop. If what you are hearing has stirred something inside you, if at some point during these last few minutes you have had the strange sensation that you already knew this, that you were remembering it rather than learning it, then it is no coincidence that this video found you today. The exact moment something like this reaches your ears is not random. There is a geometry to synchronicities, and this is one of them. Subscribe and leave a like right now, not as a gesture toward me, but as a signal you send to your own unconscious that you are willing to keep looking. Turn on the notification bell, because the next threshold this channel opens will arrive at the precise moment you need it, and the algorithm won't show it to you if that thread is cut. And if there is someone in your life who hasn't been sleeping well for nights, who wakes up with that feeling of emptiness they can't explain, who dreams of pursuers or labyrinths or houses that never end, it is no accident that this video reached you first. You are the bridge. Share it. Because there is someone on the other side waiting for this signal without knowing they are waiting for it. What is barely hinted at here is completely laid bare in my closed circle, with no algorithm filtering, with no limits imposed from the outside. The link is in the description, and what you will find on the other side is not more content. It is the continuation of a conversation that has just begun. Let's go back, because we have stayed at the threshold and we haven't yet gone down to the core. Modern science has a name for the state of consciousness that occurs right at the edge of sleep. It calls it the hypnagogic state, and it defines it as a transition, like a corridor between waking life and sleep, a state in which the brain begins to produce images and sounds spontaneously in a fragmented way without the narrative logic of full dreams. Flashes of light, voices without words, faces you don't know, figures that emerge from the darkness without anyone having summoned them. Science registers it, measures it with electrodes, classifies it. But science cannot answer the most important question, which is not what in the brain produces that state, but who is watching what the brain produces. That observer looking at the hypnagogic flashes, that presence registering the images without having consciously created them, that is you, but not the you who chose your clothes this morning, not the you who has a first and last name and a list of pending tasks. It is another you, or perhaps it is the foundational you, the substrate, the deepest layer that is normally buried beneath all the noise of the constructed personality. And here comes the part that most people are not prepared to hear. That foundational layer, that nameless observer looking from the depths, does not only exist during sleep, it exists right now. While you listen to this, there is something in you that is observing your own thoughts as if seeing them from the outside. There is something noticing the sensation of your body on the chair or in bed, registering the sound of my voice, perceiving even the fact that you are paying attention. That something is not a thought. Thoughts pass through it the way clouds pass through the sky. That something is the sky. The problem is not that you don't know it. The problem is that you know it and you forget it. Constantly. Every morning you wake up and immediately put on the mask of the daytime self. Every time the noise of the daily agenda drowns out that silence of the first few seconds after waking, every time you flee toward your phone, or toward coffee, or toward any distraction before having stayed a moment longer in that intermediate territory where you are not yet anyone on all those occasions, you are choosing forgetfulness. You are choosing to fall back asleep, metaphorically, at the exact same instant you physically wake up. The dream within the dream. That is what most people call normal life. There is an image I want you to keep. A mirror in a dark room. Just the mirror and the darkness. If there is light in the room, the mirror reflects things. Furniture, walls, your face. But if you turn off the light, the mirror reflects nothing. The darkness returns no image. What is the mirror then, when it does not reflect? Has it ceased to exist? No. It remains exactly what it was. The capacity to reflect is still intact. There is just nothing to reflect. You are that mirror. Your consciousness during deep sleep is that mirror in the darkness. There is no self, there are no images, there is no narrative. But the capacity to be conscious remains there, intact, waiting. And every morning when you turn on the light, reflections begin to appear. The body, the sensations, the memories, the plans, the entire identity you have built over the years. All of those are reflections. The mirror is none of them. The mirror is what makes them possible. Now I am going to tell you something you might already intuit, but that is rarely said with this much clarity. The fear of death, that deep fear operating beneath almost all other human fears, that fear at its root is not the fear of ceasing to breathe. It is the fear of what you already know every night. It is the fear of that darkness without a self, of that state where the mirror reflects nothing. Deep sleep is a provisional death, the daily rehearsal of dissolution, and every night you do it, and every night you survive it, and every morning the mirror turns back on. What does that tell you about what you really are? It tells you that you are more resilient to forgetfulness than you think. It tells you that there is something in you that does not dissolve, that does not depend on the narrative continuity of the self to persist. It tells you that you have already crossed that threshold thousands of times, and that on the other side, there is nothing that destroys what is essential. Only silence. Only the darkness of the mirror waiting for the light to return. But there is something else that happens during sleep that none of these layers has touched yet, and it is perhaps the most unsettling of all. When you dream, sometimes you find yourself in places you do not recognize consciously, but that you feel to be absolutely familiar. Spaces that have a density, an emotional texture, an internal logic that does not belong to the world you know awake, but that doesn't feel like pure fantasy either. There are people who describe those places with a consistency that is difficult to attribute solely to the neurological output of an individual brain. The same corridors, the same basements, the same towers, the same strangely colored sky that corresponds to no real dawn. Yet millions of people have dreamed of it without ever having agreed upon it. What are those spaces? One possibility that is uncomfortable for the modern mindset is that sleep is not just an internal theater, that when consciousness retreats from the daytime self, it doesn't simply stay floating inside the skull, but instead accesses something broader, a territory it shares with other consciousnesses, a dimension, if you want to call it that is not private but collective, that when you dream, on some level you cannot control or verify, you are not alone. I am not asking you to believe it. I am asking you to notice if you have felt it, because there is a difference between dreams that feel like imagination and dreams that feel like experience. The ones that leave you upon waking with that strange certainty that something happened, that you were somewhere, that you met someone. The ones that leave an emotional imprint deeper than many events of waking life. The ones that sometimes include information you didn't have, perceptions you can't explain, warnings that later turned out to be accurate without you knowing how. Those dreams, and you have had them, are pointing to something that the simplified version of yourself prefers to ignore. They are pointing to the fact that consciousness is more porous than the narrative of the individual self has led you to believe. They are pointing to the fact that the threshold of sleep is not just the edge of your mind, but the edge of something larger in which your mind participates without asking your permission. And if that is so, if your consciousness every night leaves the fortress of the self and plunges into something that transcends it, then the question that remains floating, the one that cannot be easily answered and perhaps for that reason no one formulates clearly, is this: what does it bring back when it returns? Because it brings something back. That is for sure. You don't always remember it in the form of images or dream narratives, but sometimes you wake up with a clarity you didn't have the night before, with a decision made that at night seemed impossible, with a certainty about something that hours earlier was total confusion, with the trace of a feeling that has no name and doesn't come from any remembered dream, but is there, permeating the first hours of the day, the way mist permeates the valley before the sun comes up. That is not magic, or maybe it is, depending on what you understand by that word. But what it certainly is information. Your consciousness, in that nighttime territory you cannot map from here, processes, connects, receives, and returns something to you every morning that you, in your haste to go back to being who you always are, almost never pause to read. What if that is the greatest waste of your life? Not the time you spend at a job that doesn't fulfill you, not the relationships that drain more than they nourish, not the years invested in goals that weren't yours, but that very instant every morning, those first 30 seconds after waking up, when you are still nobody, when the mirror is clean and could reflect anything, and you immediately sacrifice them at the altar of daily noise, to the phone, to the notifications, to the coffee, to the manufactured urgency of a day that has already decided for you who you are going to be. 30 seconds. That is all you would need to ground it, to not move, to listen to what your consciousness brings back from the other side, to let the mist of sleep settle instead of dispersing it immediately, to be, for just one moment longer, the mirror in the darkness before it fills with reflections again. What you would discover if you did it, I cannot say in words because words are instruments of the daytime self, and what is at that morning threshold does not speak the language of the self. It speaks in sensations, in weights, in certainties, without argument, but it speaks to you. It has been doing it your whole life, and you have spent your whole life not listening. There is a pattern in the way human beings relate to sleep that says a lot about the way they relate to everything else. We treat sleep as a parenthesis, as the part of life that doesn't count, as the dead time between the days that do matter. We sleep because there is no choice, because the body collapses if we don't, but we live it as an interruption, something that takes hours away from us, something that must be managed to perform better in the world outside. And that attitude, that way of treating the night as an enemy or as an inconvenience, is exactly the same attitude with which most people treat their own interior, the unconscious as a nuisance, emotions as interference, silence as a threat, introspection as a waste of productive time. We live outward with an energy that at its root is a flight from that mirror in the darkness that awaits us every night, and that every morning we try to leave behind as quickly as possible, because looking at it truly is frightening, not with the pleasant fear of a horror movie, with the cold fear of someone who recognizes something in the mirror they didn't expect to find, with the fear of realizing that the self you have defended for all these years, the one that has opinions and wounds and achievements and shames, is a layer. It is the shore. It is the surface of the ocean. And the ocean has no bottom that you have touched yet. Every night you sink into it. Every morning you float back to the surface. And between one movement and the other, something happens that neither the most advanced science nor the oldest tradition has been able to fully describe, because what happens there has no spectator to document it. What happens there takes place at the only blind spot of human consciousness. The instant when consciousness turns back upon itself and finds nothing to look at except its own formless nature. That is what you are when you sleep. Not absence, not nothingness. Pure consciousness without an object, nameless presence. The observer before there is anything to observe. The mirror before the light. And now, you who have made it this far, you who have been listening all this time and who at some point along the way felt that something clicked in a way you didn't expect, listen to me. What you have just received is not theory. It is a map, and maps are useless stored away in a drawer. What you do with what you have heard in the coming hours, and especially in the next 30 seconds tomorrow when you wake up, determines whether this was just another video you watched one afternoon or the moment something began to change. Leave a like now, not out of courtesy, but as a declaration that you are no longer content with falling asleep without looking. Write a comment with what this has stirred in you, a single word if that's what you have, because every word written out loud is a pact with oneself that the unconscious registers with more fidelity than any promise made in silence. Share this video because there is someone you know who also wakes up in the early morning without knowing why, who also feels that there is something in their dreams trying to tell them something they don't know how to read, and that person needs this map even if they don't know they need it yet. Turn on the notification bell because what is coming on this channel has a cadence. It arrives when it needs to arrive, and if the thread is cut, the signal won't find you again with the same precision. That is not a warning from me. It is the way synchronicities work. And you already know you are not here by accident. And if you feel that all of this that has opened up this afternoon deserves to keep opening up without the limits that this space imposes, the link in the description leads to a place where the conversation continues, without filters, without walls, where what is hinted at here is named there with all its letters. Crossing that door is not following me. It is deciding never to fall asleep again. Every night you die. Every morning you are reborn. And in the space between one thing and the other, in that darkness without a self where the mirror reflects nothing, lies the only real answer to the question of who you are. You won't find it in any book. You won't find it on any screen. You will find it tomorrow morning, in those 30 seconds before the day claims you, if for once you decide to stay still and let the silence speak before you drown it out. That is the door. It has always been there. You yourself cross it every night without realizing it. The difference between the one who sleeps and the one who truly wakes up is not the dream. It is the intention with which one sits at the threshold.